Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ethos Online. Again, this is a space where we can be, belong, and become the very best version of ourselves. So, wherever you're joining us today, we just want to say welcome. Again, we have people viewing anywhere from Michigan to Florida to California. We're so glad that you are joining us in this study about this, specifically right now, the book of Genesis. And so last week we took a bit of a break. I was not feeling well, but we're back. We're back into it. And I'm excited to share more about this beautiful book. And so some of you have asked again, how long is this study going to be? We've already done like a year and a half or so. And answer, as long as it takes. We're going to move through every verse and we're going to find every element that is interesting, important, that has been studied in the past, words, phrases that have meaning that maybe we've missed. Just things that oftentimes I think present day churches will miss because we don't speak Hebrew, right? We're not Jewish. And so we ask the deeper questions. We delve in. And so in this study with Genesis, it's taken us a while, but it has been so worth it. Every week, there's something really beautiful and profound to be found in the text. So a reminder, Genesis, again, is not a history book. It was not written in order to give us exactly detailed, perfect accounts, dates, timelines, specific real names, real incidents. That was never the point. It was not written like today's history books giving account of the past. The whole point of it being compiled in the first place, and when I say it, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Torah, the whole point of Torah being compiled was that they were in Babylonian captivity. Right? 587 BC. I think many of you now, you could give the intro, right? Just a reminder again, though, they are in Babylonian captivity. And the question is, will we assimilate or not? Will we take Babylonian gods as ours or not? And the answer overwhelmingly from the Jewish nation was no, we're not going to assimilate. We will not become Babylonian. We're not going to take on their stories, their values, their rituals, their gods. We are going to hold true to what is Israelite, right? What is Hebrew? What is Jewish? And so the way to hold on to it, well, you retell the stories, you retell the traditions, you retell the rituals, and that's what they do over and over again. And so no wonder whenever they bring Torah out, whenever a rabbi sits in the position I'm in, when they're sitting on this stool and they're sharing Torah explanation, right? People rejoice because what they're getting is not a history back. What they're getting is their identity. They're hearing about this is what it means to be a Hebrew, and that is worth celebrating. And so approaching it that way is going to bring a lot more life to the text than just saying, hey, here's a history book, right? There's so much more there. So today we delve into chapter 30, verses 1 through 24. So again, understanding, right? We've been reading about Jacob and Esau. Understanding Jacob and Esau, these are two individuals who have deep metaphorical meaning. And so we've talked about this. Jacob is the holder of Torah. He understands the beauty of Torah. He understands the promise that God has given Israel. And so because of this, Jacob, yes, the deceiver, all of these things, but the bigger picture here, if you are a Hebrew, if you are a Jewish person, you understand Jacob understands intuitively the spiritual importance of the blessing, of what it means to be a Jew. Whereas Esau, right, he doesn't understand the birthright. He just gives it away for soup, basically, right? So Jacob and Esau are these two different ways of kind of living in the world. And so you have the higher self and the lower self. And so for Israel, the twins, again, we'll read this one more time. The twins are really the beautiful light and darkness that we Jews embody from day to day. Whichever side we feed is a side that will either waste the blessing of life or multiply it. I love viewing it this way. It makes far more sense. It's something that can be applicable, right? And so Jacob and Esau. So now we move into Jacob. Jacob has been he's been tending the sheep, right? He's now married to Jacob and Rachel and Leah, and he has been prospering, right? He's been there. He's been a great shepherd for Laban. He's helped Laban's entire family grow, exponentially as Jacob's family has grown. And so now what will Jacob do? Will he always stay there under Laban? Will he stay there just as a shepherd, or is something different going to happen? That's the question. And so the answer is going to be found in this chapter. So here we go. Let me start by reading, and then we'll step back and we'll go over it again in detail. So here we go. Verse 1, Genesis chapter 30. And Rachel saw that she had not borne any children to Jacob, and Rachel envied her sister. And she said to Jacob, give me children. If not, I am dead. Talk about dramatic, right? If not, I'm dead. Yeah, that's serious. Jacob became angry with Rachel. And he said, am I instead of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? So she said, here is my maidservant Bilhah. Come to her, and she will bear children on my knees, so that I too will be built up from her. So she gave him her maidservant Bilhah for a wife, and Jacob came to her. And Bilhah conceived, and she bore Jacob a son. And Rachel said, God has judged me, and he has also hearkened to my voice and has given me a son. So she named him Dan. And Bilhah, Rachel's maidservant, conceived again, and she bore a second son. And Rachel said, with divine bonds I have been joined to my sister. I have also prevailed. So she named him Naphtali. And when Leah saw that she had stopped bearing children, she took her maidservant Zilpah and gave her to Jacob for a wife. And Zilpah, Leah's maidservant, bore Jacob a son. And Leah said, luck has come. So she named him Gad. And Zilpah, Leah's maidservant, bore Jacob a second son. You're beginning to see kind of the repetition, right? And Leah said, because of my good fortune, for women have declared my fortune. So she named him Asher. These names should be kind of ringing a bell, right? Reuben went in the days of the wheat harvest, and she found Dudaim in the field and brought them to Leah, his mother. And Rachel said to Leah, now give me some of your son's Dudaim. And she said to him, it is a small matter that you have taken my husband, that you wish also to take my son's Dudaim. And we'll talk about what that is. So Rachel said, therefore he shall sleep with you tonight as payment for your son's Dudaim. When Jacob came from the field in the evening, and Leah came forth toward him, she said, you shall come to me, because I've hired you with my son's Dudaim. And she slept with him on that night. And God hearkened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. And Leah said, God has given me my reward, for I have given my maidservant to my husband. So she named him Issachar. And Leah conceived again, and she bore Jacob a sixth son. And Leah said, God has given me a good portion. This time my husband will live with me, for I have borne him 6 sons. So she named him Zebulun. And afterwards she bore a daughter, and she named her Dinah. And God remembered Rachel, and God hearkened to her, and he opened her womb. And she conceived and bore a son, and she said, God has taken away my reproach. So she named him Joseph. And there's Joseph, right? Saying, may the Lord grant me yet another son. So that's a mouthful, right? A lot of give me a son and I want a son. No, I want a son. And it seems almost as if this chapter would be kind of skipped over quickly, right? And truth be told, many people will. They'll read over this section of this chapter, and they'll say, well, you got Rachel and Leah, and they're kind of in competition, and they keep having sons, right? The names of these sons, if you are a Jewish person, they have deep, deep meaning. When you hear these names, Gad, Dan, when you hear these different names, you know immediately the writers are talking about the 12 tribes of Israel. Where do the 12 tribes come from? Well, they come out of conflict. Why are the 12 tribes always in conflict? Well, they were born in conflict. Yeah, already there's so many connections, so many obvious ahas, right? If you're Jewish, you get this. If you are someone reading this 3,000 years later, 2,000 years later, when you read this, you just think, oh, it's just a boring history of who was born here and then. Not the point. This is Israel saying, our tribes have been at war with one another, at competition for the blessing for a very, very long time. How do we deal with this competitive nature we have with one another? How do we deal with trying to gain and wrestle for the blessing? That's the question they're asking, right? That's the bigger question. So let's read again. Verse 1 and 2. Rachel saw that God had not borne any children. So Rachel envied her sister, and she said, "Give me children." But notice this, Jacob's response. Jacob is very different than Abraham, right? Jacob's very different than his father in this matter. Jacob does something different here. He says, "Look, I'm not going to follow my predecessors in this way, in the same way I did before." You know what he says? "Am I instead God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" Notice that. Some things, Rachel, are not within our control. Heavy, right? I want you to think about that. Some things are just not within our control, even though we want to control everything, don't we? I would argue in our culture today, there's one thing that makes people feel the most crazy, and it's when we don't feel like we have complete control over a situation. We want to be able to click the button. If I hit the fast forward button and it doesn't move fast enough, I feel out of control, don't I? When I go to Netflix and I click on it, it doesn't work. If I open the internet, whatever it is, people freak out when they lose a little bit of control. And I wonder for you right now, have you ever had those moments? Ever have those moments where you've done everything you can and now you just kind of feel stuck, right? This is where Israel often gets into trouble. You've done everything you can. You've put out every piece of energy, you've given the thing all your time, your energy, your resources. And now what? Nothing, right? You're stuck. You're waiting. And for some of us, we don't like that in-between stage, do we? We don't have the patience to wait. And so for some of us, we get into a lot of trouble here, don't we? We need to force our will. We cannot sit and we can't sit on this, can we? We can't wait. So we will force our will on the thing. And when we force our will on the thing, whatever the decision, the job, whatever the thing is, when we force our will, sometimes we make a big mess, don't we? Yeah, I like this quote. When Israel forces the will of Yahweh, they often create two paths where there need only be one. What an interesting idea here, right? There was one path. We just had to wait, and the thing was going to open up. But no, because we had to have our will, because we had to have our way, because we couldn't wait a little bit longer. Now there's all of these multiple paths, and things have gotten very confusing, haven't they? And so, but Yahweh works with all paths, created or destined. I really like that. Even though we find ways, we lose patience, we find ways to blow it. I like this idea that the divine still finds a way to bless. Life still finds a way of working itself out, even when we force our will on situations that really need patience rather than forced will. Such a beautiful idea. Let me keep reading. Verse 3. Here is my maidservant Bilhah, right? This is her idea here. Here's my maidservant Bilhah. Come to her, she will bear children on my knees, so that I too will be built up from her. This is an interesting, an interesting phrase. Most people don't catch this, but it meant something if you were an Israelite person, if you were Jewish. She will bear children on my knees. On my knees? Well, here's what this means. Historically, the phrase bear on my knees is a Hebrew idiom that is reflective of a long-standing Middle Eastern custom. The custom is that by ceremonially placing a child on one's knees or lap, that person is signifying that they are claiming that child as their own, that it's a legal claim. And so this would actually happen sometimes with different women. If a baby was born out of wedlock, or if the woman didn't want it, or whatever the issue was, or if there was if you had a servant and you felt like that was your child or whatever, if you held that baby on your knees ceremonially and you claimed the baby was yours. And so this is kind of a legal phrase that most people, it skips right by them. But she's essentially saying, look, Bilhah's going to have the baby, but it's mine, right? It's legally mine. And so, again, being a woman during that time era, it gave her standing. Before she would have had none. But now she has a child. She has worth, right? Her worth, of course, is coming from somewhere else, from someone else, right? Claiming someone else's promise. Do you guys kind of see the idea here? Israel's claiming the promise of others rather than waiting patiently for the promise, their promise, to come through. Yeah, really good, right? Okay, here we go. So it continues. And so she said, "Here is my maidservant, Bilhah. Come to her, and she will bear children." Bilhah means to be unconcerned with, to be put off. So Bilhah takes on the person of the victim. The victim is often created. I love this. It's so true. When we take our own paths, do our own thing, rather than wait on the promise. So Bilhah will have this like genealogy of getting the short end of the stick every time. She is going to over and over again miss blessings, right? And so there's this really interesting warning right here to Israel. And this has been written by many, many different rabbis. So this is kind of an ancient tradition of viewing this part. There is a warning here to Israel, right? Be careful that you don't use people as pawns in your plans, right? You will end up hurting people. You will create victims. And like, think about that for us today. When you use people, when you don't have friends, but you just have a bunch of people you use, if that's not a friendship. If you've ever been used, I know that feeling, right? That is not a friendship. That's someone using you, right? And so Israel, don't look at your neighbors as resources. Look at them as human beings, right? What an interesting idea for us today, right? For any administration we've had in America, what if we viewed our neighbors not as resources, but as friends, right? Like, what an interesting idea there. They're not just resources or pawns we use. They are our friends. They are fellow human beings. Oh, Israel, right? What a deep, deep message. Continues in verse 6. God has judged me. He's also hearkened my voice and has given me a son, Dan. Right? So Bilhah has a son, Dan. The word judged here, God has judged me, does not mean angry judgment. Now I'm in trouble. I'm going to the fireplace. No, that's not the point. God has judged, delivered me. The idea here, delivered me. So she feels like someone other than God has delivered her. Right? That's where we get a little, though she pretends to give God praise, of course, here. But again, the deliverance, the promise, came from her own doing. Are you seeing it? Any one Jewish person reading this, they're thinking, be careful here, right? You've been delivered, but you're attributing that to God. The reality is this was your own doing. And at some point, we all know the Jewish history of Dan and this tribe, things get off kilter a little bit with this tribe, right? Because they have created so many multiple paths where there needed only be one. Right? It's going to create conflict. While at the time it may seem like deliverance. Good. And Bilhah, Rachel's maidservant, conceived again and bore Jacob a second child, and a son. And Rachel said, with divine bonds I have been joined to my sister. I have also prevailed. So she named him Naphtali. So remember, we're counting the tribes of Israel. Naphtali, Dan, Reuben, right? We're going to get to all of those soon. So when Leah saw that she had stopped bearing children, now Leah's turn, right? She took her maidservant, Zilpah. And again, if you know the connections here, Zilpah, an Egyptian name, right? We're connecting Egypt, Babylon. We're making all the connections to when they were in exile, right? So we're using the ways of empire to build our tribes. And if we use the ways of empire, the ways of Egypt, Babylon, we're going to create some conflict. That's the deeper picture here. So Zilpah, she has a son, and so you'll kind of get the idea here. And I love what this one rabbi says here, this commentary. So good. They said, look, Leah and Rachel in many ways represent the northern and southern kingdoms of Israel. The constant biting back and forth, back and forth. Both fought for the blessing, both eventually find brokenness. And many people actually, and I don't have this really in my notes, but many people actually make connections to Rachel and Leah. And you have in the New Testament, Mary and Martha. Yeah. Mary and Martha become the Leah and Rachel in this way. They become this picture of Israel kind of broken in two, right? And so many people will point out, oh, interesting. Mary and Martha become the picture of the Jews and the Gentiles, whereas Leah and Rachel would have been the picture of the northern and southern kingdoms. Either way, the message over and over again is if the two communities, if the two groups, if the family doesn't figure a way to come together and not be in competition but walk as one, they're not going to survive. If you hold on to the promise, Mary and Martha, Leah and Rachel, you're going to make it. If you don't, the whole thing falls apart. Right? And so again, it's so fascinating. When you look at the New Testament, the Old Testament, you'll see how these two often, they had the New Testament or the Old Testament opened as they're writing the New. And they're thinking of Leah and Rachel as they're writing Mary and Martha. Really interesting insight, right? Let me keep going. I'll give you more. So good. It continues on. Leah, luck has come to me. So there's Gad. And then we have Asher come in. So because Rachel's servant has two children, now Leah has to have two, right? And so the paths, they're enlarging. The blessing, it was simple. I'll make you people great. But they keep attempting to fulfill the blessing their own way. And so you have Asher, Gad, Reuben, right? Gad, fortune, Asher, meaning happy one. These are the meanings of the tribes of Israel. Look at verse 14, though. And Reuben went in the days of the wheat harvest, and he found dudaim on the field and brought them to Leah, his mother. And Rachel said to him, now give me some of my sons. And so what an interesting point, right? Look at what one rabbi says about this. What is interesting is that since Hebrew is a root word-based language, we find that the word for mandrake, which is this word I have trouble even pronouncing, dudaim, which is an offshoot of a word, dodai. Yeah, you've heard me talk about the three different forms of Hebrew love, dodai, which means sexual love. So Rachel agrees to give Leah her dodai, her passion for Jacob in return for a hope that she will have more children. Interesting, right? She, again, today when we read it, we think mandrake, why would she? What's the point of that? Is that it's got some kind of special like root power? Whatever, is this a holistic medicine? No. The idea here, as a Hebrew, you would have read, Rachel agrees to give Leah the passion she has for her husband in order that she can continue to rise in power and ranking in privilege. What we are willing to give away when we think we can satisfy, we can make the thing work, we can do it on our own, right? When we don't have patience, we oftentimes get ourselves in trouble. And the idea here is that Rachel's ego is now getting in the way, and she's giving up things that she need not give away. She's giving up her passion for her husband, right? Heavy, really, really heavy. It keeps going. Verse 15, 16, 17, we have them, a new son after this. Haram, this place of sanctuary, it keeps moving until we get to verse 22. And God remembered Rachel because now Rachel's barren. She's watching Leah succeed. She's being more and more frustrated, right? Even though she's done all these things, she feels like she's the one losing out. But notice this. Verse 22, I love this point. God remembered Rachel, and God hearkened to her, and he opened her womb. After all of this back and forth, backfighting, mandrakes are, giving away her passion for her husband. After all of this, pushing to have your will done, not having the patience to wait, I love that the divine still shows up. The divine still blesses, remembers Rachel. That word remember, over and over and over again. You will see this word. God remembers his children. It's a beautiful way of looking at the world. When you think all hope is gone, the divine remembers Rachel. The divine remembers Rachel and gives her the blessing. And so the promise, Joseph is the one now that's going to bring Israel from famine into harvest, which is going to help Israel make it through the pain and the brokenness. Joseph is going to go through so many different difficulties, but he is going to help sustain Israel, right? He's going to fulfill the promise that Israel is going to make it. What a beautiful way of bringing in this next story of Joseph, right? At some point soon, we're going to get there. But again, beautiful, God shows up. And that's how we're going to end today. God shows up. The divine remembers. And so I was thinking, how do I talk about that today as an application? But then I started thinking, there was a moment in this teaching where I thought, sometimes things aren't in our control. What do we do? What do we do? Do we push through, insert our will on the thing, or do we choose to wait? So I thought, what do we do? Right? What do we do when we're not feeling in control? So I started looking around at different pieces I had, and then I came across, this is going to make you laugh, at school, there's this magazine, Good Housekeeping. And what do you suppose I came across? Yeah, I came across an article. I came across this article from this housewife who said, you know what? My house is crazy all the time, and I'm always feeling out of control. And my life is like that too. It's like how I live in my house. And I was like, well, this is interesting. And she actually gave these examples that I was like, you know what? This is so perfect. And I'm going to share this with my audience because I think it's really good. So the first thing she said is when life feels out of control, she does this. She said she cleans. Right? Anyone that's tending a home, whether it's male, female, whatever, if you're cleaning the home, here's the thing. When you clean up a mess, you have now made space for something, right? You have made space for something. If you're feeling like your life is out of control, stop, clean up an area. Make some space, open the windows, start cleaning, do your laundry, change the bedding, take your rugs out, shake it off, sweep, mop. If your living space allows light in, if it allows you to feel an openness, do it. Because that openness, that cleaning, that openness that you've created will at some point be filled, right? And so when you open it up, you allow yourself to breathe again, right? Which we'll get to in a minute. Another thing that she said is exercise. Number 2, when you're feeling out of control, exercise. Get out, exercise, because nobody can keep you from doing that for your body, right? It's going to relieve stress. It's going to do so many things for you. Run around, get outside, get on a trail, whatever it is. Exercise. It's going to clear your mind so you don't jump and make the mistake Israel does of inserting your will on a moment, on a situation, whatever it is. You allow yourself time. Another thing, get some small goals. Create some small goals that you can make. Right? So making small goals, you're going to feel more in control. It's going to be easily attainable. You're going to be like, I can do these things. If I can achieve these things, then that big thing I'm dealing with, it's going to be attainable at some point. I'll be able to make it. And then lastly, create your momentum. I really like this one. Create your momentum. If you know why you feel out of control, see if there are small actions you can take to change course. And then start doing those actions, right? Until you get enough steam to where you're moving, right? You're moving. And at some point, when you are able to, you're going to be able to tackle the big thing that's in front of you. And you'll be able to do it at the right time. So good. I was so excited when I came across that article because I thought of you. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. That was a lot of fun. Taking that section that oftentimes is kind of skipped over and finding something interesting to bring about around it. Learn to have patience. Learn not to jump ahead like Israel. Don't create so many paths when we can stick with the one. Right? So simple, so good. Donations, please consider going to ethos-church.org/donate. Give that tax-deductible donation. Please partner with us as we continue giving really valuable content every week. And as always, please consider going to Ethos Living Rooms. We'd love to continue connecting with you live as an audience all across the nation. And hit that subscribe button. And let us know how we're doing. Take care, everyone. We love you, and we'll see you next week.